Hello, everyone. Welcome to the live stream with Angelina here. This has been an extraordinarily dramatic week, especially in the financial markets. The violent swings in gold and silver combined with sharp crash in cryptocurrencies represent an epic level of financial turbulence, something that has not been seen in decades of financial history, and trillions of dollars have been wiped out in just 1 week. And today, we're going to talk about what's really behind this upheaval and why it points directly to the coming collapse of the Chinese Communist Party. Let's start at the beginning of 2026. Since the capture of Majuro alive and the unfolding events involving Zhang Youxia and Liu Zhenli, global financial markets have remained in a state of continuous instability. And these events share a crucial common denominator. They strike at the CCP's most vital financial arteries, which is oil and military. The chain reaction is like dropping a massive bomb into deep water. The shock waves are now racing toward the CCP itself and the global financial system at a speed we have never seen before. We have already analyzed the Majuro incident in detail in earlier live streams. Also, I won't repeat that analysis here. Interested viewers can revisit those episodes. We'll post the links in the comments. What matters most is this. Maduro's capture marks the total collapse of the CCP's so-called grand oil chessboard in Latin America. At the same time, the CCP's military deployments and overseas arms sales, especially those centered around Venezuela, have taken devastating blows. President Trump previously stated that Chinese and Russian weapons deployed in Venezuela had completely failed. This has enormous consequences for the CCP's global arms trade. After all, if your weapons don't work, and who would buy them? Weapons prove themselves only on the battlefield, and no amount of propaganda can change that. Inside the CCP system, those who have been long been responsible for military equipment and arms sales are who? Liu Zhenli and Zhang Youxia, right? So oil and arms exports are the CCP's most powerful revenue engines. As Mr. Miles Gore explained in an earlier phone call, Zhang Youxia controls enormous pools of money, including funds from CCP overseas financial institutions, assets tied to the Wang Qishan faction, especially those once held in Swiss banks, as well as money from the oil sector and the military units. None of these are fully under Xi Jinping's control. Now, with Zhang Youxia detained, these networks must urgently find new ways to hide their wealth. And on top of that, an estimated 3,000 to 4,000 military officers, all of them wealthy individuals are expected to be arrested. And they, too, need to move their assets. Under these conditions, financial market turmoil is inevitable. As Miles Gore previously revealed, that most major global cryptocurrencies are controlled by the CCP. Fear of being investigated or arrested naturally triggers massive sell offs and changes in how money is concealed. Funds that were once parked in Bitcoin and Ethereum are now flowing rapidly into physical gold and silver, that's fueling extreme volatility. What we witnessed this week in precious metals can only be described as a blood-soaked roller coaster. The gold and silver markets have entered their most volatile phase in decades, showing a chaotic pattern of high-level collapse, violent rebound, then renewed sell-offs. Early this week, gold plunged sharply from last week's near record high of around $5,600 per ounce, dropping more than 15% at one point to around $4,400. And silver was even more volatile, suffering a 38% on last Friday, and then almost like a market-wide circuit breaker. So why does all of this matter for the CCP's fate? Because the PLA is the CCP's core interest block, connected to a vast networks of beneficiaries. And over the past decade of Xi Jinping's so-called anti-corruption campaign, much of the wealth once controlled by Wang Qishan and other veteran CCP factions, especially in oil, ended up concentrated in Zhang Youxia's hands. Now that the military itself is in turmoil, these interest groups know exactly what to do. Based on past experience, their first instinct is rapid capital flight. The recent waves of asset liquidation, the chaos in Bitcoin and Ethereum, and the violent swings in gold and silver are all direct consequences of this capital exodus. On one side, there is frantic liquidation driven by internal military purges. On the other, the ability of overseas markets to absorb these funds is shrinking. So, what does this kind of stampede for the axis lead to? Well, it leads to an instant liquidity collapse inside China's domestic financial system. This is precisely why we see Xi Jinping calling for the construction of a so-called financial powerhouse, and why CCP state media has recently been flooded with discussion about financial regulations and financial security. At the same time, the crypto market has been in chaos. Bitcoin briefly fell below 70,000 and Ethereum dropped below 2,000. Against this backdrop, Mr. Miles Gore pointed out that as the global financial system enters a period of deep disruption, real world assets, RWA, will emerge as a key topic in rethinking wealth preservation and the future monetary system. Almost immediately after Mr. Gore made this point, the CCP reacted. On February the 6th, the People's Bank of China the National Development and Reform Commission, the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, and 8 government departments jointly issued a notice on further preventing and addressing risks related to cryptocurrencies. This is an extremely heavy document. It involves the PBOC, NDRC, and Ministry of Public Security, the Supreme People's Court, the Supreme People's Procuratorate, the nearly all enforcement and regulatory authorities, and nearly all. This is not ordinary economic regulation. It has been elevated to the level of national security and social stability. Historically, that signals the beginning of large-scale crackdowns on cross-border money laundering and asset liquidation. Just look closely at how this document responds to Mr. Gore's revelations. Okay, first, it explicitly classifies cryptocurrency related activities as illegal financial behavior. Combined with ongoing internal purges and instability facing CCP allies like Iran and Venezuela, Beijing clearly realizes that asset liquidation and capital flight are spiraling out of control. But by cutting off key channels such as bank account openings and fund transfers, the CCP is effectively severing the hidden tunnels that connect domestic assets to global markets. A major escalation in this notice is the inclusion of real world asset tokenization, RWA, in the scope of severe crackdowns. RWA refers to turning real assets such as real estate or equity into blockchain based tokens for trading. And this is the CCP's direct response to Mr. Mousegore's disclosures. They fear that insiders and regime loyalists might get ideas, get inspired, and the goal is to block any attempt to break up domestic fixed assets, entire buildings, money equity, and quietly sell them to overseas through RWA structures. And the clause stating that overseas entities and individuals may not provide services to domestic entities represents the CCP's long-arm jurisdiction. It shuts down any domestic overseas coordination. Using domestic assets for tokenized financing is now treated as a criminal offense in Communist China. At the same time, Xi Jinping left himself an escape hatch. The document also states, except with approval from the competent authorities and the reliance on specific financial infrastructure. In other words, the CCP retains full interpretive power over asset digitalization. Only state-approved, fully controllable digital platforms such as pilot programs based on the digital RMB are legal. So what is Xi Jinping doing? Is he preparing to close the doors and beat dogs? not only are people physically trapped inside the country, but money and assets must also stay inside communist China. And this is the financial version of martial law. It signals that Xi is preparing for far greater political and economic shocks ahead, using legal and technological tools to forcibly keep wealth inside China and prevent systematic financial collapse. But these measures usually backfire, intensifying internal pressure and triggering even more violent asset price swings. So from this perspective, we can foresee even greater turbulence lies ahead. The three warning signs of a financial tsunami hitting the CCP are now all present. Number one, open fractures at the core of power. 张又侠、刘振立 caused military turmoil, right? Number two is the panic-driven capital flight by elites that would cause liquidation and escape. Number three is violent shocks in external safe haven channels like Bitcoin and global asset shifts. And behind Xi Jinping's actions lies even deeper, lesser known layer revealed by Mr. Gore in his December 3rd, 2021 live stream. What he was saying, Zhao Changpeng, which is finance, belongs to the Wang Qishan faction. His direct superiors are the Guo Shuqing, governor of the PBOC, and the Zhong Liang, vice governor. Zhou Liang. And number two, he said, CCP standing committee factions divide their power and profits clearly. And Wang Qishan mainly controls pensions, funerals, insurance, banking, finance, and discipline inspection. And the Jiang Zemin family, telecommunications, Huawei, ZTE, and Shanghai-based banks. And telecommunications have since been taken over by the Xi Jinping family. Remember, Maduro was showing off on TV that Xi Jinping gifted him a Huawei cell phone, right? Because it's from his family. And number three, the CCP-backed digital currencies all have owners and factions. And Jiang faction, it controls over 1/3 of Bitcoin, and Huobi is basically belongs to Li Ling, Meng Jianzhu, Sun Lijun, and then USDT with Tether, it's Wang Qishan. So all of this helps us to understand why Xi Jinping gets to this point. So what he really wanted is Xi Jinping is gradually pursuing pushing decentralized crypto out of China, eliminating Jiang Zemin, Jiang family, Wang family, and Meng Jianzhu, enforcing absolute centralization and promoting the digital RMB. So by doing this, everything ultimately ends up in Xi Jinping's hands. So at its core, we are now, after the turbulence of last week, the CCP's downfall is a financial collapse. The so-called $3 trillion in foreign exchange reserves is being rapidly depleted. And the regime will no longer be able to use money to enslave their population, fund internal power struggles, or manipulate factional battles involving figures like Zhang Youxia. When a dictator runs out of money, collapse is instantaneous. So Mr. Guo's February 5th phone call made this crystal clear. The era of the new federal state of China has fully arrived. He is bringing the climax of taking down the CCP to all fellow fighters, especially those inside the firewall and within the party itself. So it's time to pop the champagne. Friends and fellow fighters, the financial storm is already visible on the horizon. The collapse of the CCP and the collapse of Xi Jinping leave no room to reversal. It's our turn to win. So thank you for watching today's live stream, and leave your comments, subscribe, and repost. See you next time.